Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Sexy Business Podcast. I'm Lewd Neko, as always, and joining me is Spooky Dangerous.
Hello.
And today we are going to be talking about adult games or eroge that we hate, or games we have some major problems with. So this will be our chance to be super negative and rant and ramble.
It's the Groans and Gripes episode.
I'll be getting us started by talking about like one of the few visual novels I actually fucking hate. I'll say to begin with, I generally speaking don't hate things. It takes a lot for a piece of media to upset me so much I can like strongly say I hate it. Usually I can say like, oh, this game isn't for me, or there's some minor problems, but it's okay. But How to Date a Magical Girl, I feel like it personally attacked me. Now, I will say this one isn't necessarily a game where the main draw is adult content, though there is a sex scene at the end for every girl. So it's more like Katawa Shoujo, where the sex is sort of tacked on. But it still has some very adult themes when it comes to its content. So this one's kind of in the vein of Madoka Magica, for those of you familiar with the Magical Girl series. So it's a darker take on magical girls, just through the lens of a very traditional stat raiser dating sim. Now, I have complicated feelings about stat raisers. I think more often than not, they're done badly. I think they can be really fun. You think of something like Tokimeki Memorial, which basically is like the mother of the dating sim, does it amazingly. A lot of stat grinders, I find the problem is either there's such a small margin for error that it becomes really frustrating to waste a ton of time on a route where you get a bad ending or where you realize halfway through you're completely fucked and you
You're
have
in
to
the
go through
wrong
a bunch of
stat.
bullshit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or there's just some where it's just not fun, basically, where it's just clicking and clicking and grinding with like no real fun with like strategizing or trying to figure things out. I had read some of the reviews for this one beforehand, and a lot of people were warning. It's very hard to get the best ending. It can be really annoying to replay to get all the girls' routes. So I used a day-to-day walkthrough that gets you all of the endings in one playthrough because I didn't want to spend, hundreds of hours or dozens of hours just, playing through the same scenes over and over again. Now, when it comes to the actual game itself, one of the biggest problems I had right off the bat was the art, not the CG art. If you look on the Steam page, generally speaking, you look at like the second and third image, it's pretty good. It's nice visual novel art. I like the character designs, I like the colors, I love the magical girl designs. But if you look at the actual sprites, so the talking sprites you're going to be seeing for 90% of the game, they look unfinished. If you look at the coloring, it is completely different and it looks like they couldn't pay for like nice rendering, so they just got sort of flat shading. It looks super out of place compared to the like really nicely rendered backgrounds and the nice CGs, and it was just kind of shocking to me that it was released in that state intentionally, it would seem. Unless they really couldn't just pay the artist at the very end. They were like, ah, yeah, just do whatever for the sprites, because that's like the only explanation I could possibly think of.
Yeah, I'm looking at this
And
now.
then,
I've just pulled up a little slice from the trailer, and I can definitely see exactly what you mean. The first kind of spot where it shows up, because obviously they show off mostly CG stuff in the trailer. They're standing out in like a street, and the lighting and the because of the way the characters are barely shaded or rendered or anything, the lighting makes them look like they're green screened into the scene. So yeah, I feel you on this one.
yeah, it's kind of shocking, especially compared to how nice the CG art is. I think that's why I was so mad, because I was like, wow, these are really good magical girl designs. I like these characters. Why did they draw them so bad? So that was my major problem number two. And then I think my second problem is with the ending. I won't spoil it because there might be like one person out there who's like, oh, I want to play this. Generally speaking, when it comes to the plot, I think it did some things good and it did some things bad. There was a certain point in the game where it gets so grimdark and edgy, it loops back around to being kind of funny. Where, I find a lot of the sort of Madoka inspired magical girl series do this, where they're trying to one up Madoka and they're like, oh, we're just going to kill these characters in really violent ways or make something really fucked up and shocking happen just to be shocking. So that was like one of my problems as the game progressed. And then all I'll say about the ending is it's going to ruin all of the plot you've read beforehand, and it is also a huge cliche plot twist. So I had
Oh no,
felt
it was all
very
a dream,
betrayed.
wasn't it?
Because I had spent looking at my playtime like 10 or 12 hours playing this game, which isn't a lot for a visual novel, especially compared to most Japanese ones, which are like 40 to 60 hours. But it was still like a good chunk of time, especially with all the dating sim mechanics. So I felt personally betrayed when the ending was just fucking awful at the very end. So would not recommend. I'm sure there's like redeeming qualities of it. Oh, the other horrible thing, and this is more of like problematic zone. So you can choose the main character's gender. You can choose whether they're male or female, though it's very obvious in certain moments that this was a plot written for a male protagonist. And I say this because, the girls do the thing where like, oh, something accidentally perverted will happen. And they're like, oh my gosh, you can't do that. And like, it's very obvious they're like calling you a pervert because you're a guy and you were thinking about boobs or something. And it just feels incredibly weird when you're playing as a woman. Not to say that women like, grope each other or stuff like that, but it just like, okay, I can tell you didn't actually want a female protagonist. But it also especially comes through where the tomboy character is canonically bisexual or canonically sort of more lesbian leaning. But I can't remember exactly what the fuck happens in her storyline, but towards the end, you find out all of them have sort of a dark twist of some sorts. And hers, if I'm remembering correctly, was that she's a lesbian because she was sexually assaulted. But if you're playing as a guy, I guess she's just like, well, you've healed me of my trauma and now I'm okay with this. And it
The
was just
magical
a
dick to cure
really,
all.
yeah, it was just this like really awful plot twist for the like tomboy character to be like, oh, she's only gay because of assault. So that part was like really kind of gross, and again, super weird when you're playing as a woman. I don't even remember how they do it because I know, like, I think if you play as a man, like the big revelation is like, oh, you've helped me, process my trauma or whatever. But I guess if you're a girl, it's just like I'm still lesbian.
I did want to circle back for a second to the kind of shock value content when it comes to writing. Because I feel like not many places do it very well. And I'm talking like even big studio movies and TV shows. Like a lot of my gripes with HBO content generally is they've created a niche where it's like, ah, yes, this is clearly R rated and we're going to make sure we have as much R rated content as possible to get you rather than actually use it to, I don't know, portray a cool scene or set up something actually interesting for the story. They're just literally trying to make you feel uncomfortable while you're watching this piece of media. And I feel like in a visual novel, that's really not really the place to be exploring this. And if you're competing against something like Madoka Magica, which I have seen, and it doesn't go insane, but it is a really good diversion upon the genre, right? But knowing how that goes, you can't do that again. It's like telling the same joke twice. Once you've heard the punchline, it's not funny the second time. And Doki Doki Literature Club also already exists and pushed the medium so far where you like literally delete files out of your computer to change how the game runs and stuff like that, and all the characters do all these insane things. It You're never going to be able to reinvent that in a way that's going to be relevant. Like just going and being edgy and being dark is not really good storytelling unless if you actually bring something new and interesting to it, and I don't think that these kind of people can.
Yeah, and like I said, eventually, especially when they go heavy on the gore, but there's no real like impact. Like
Yeah.
Madoka was heavy because it had emotional impact. Yes, it had some shocking scenes and deaths, but they weren't like, blood all over the place and you see her organs on the ground and stuff like
Yeah.
that. It's just like, oh, this is terrifying because this awful thing has happened.
Well, you know
Whereas I
what
feel like
the
a lot of the
impact is going to
Madoka,
be on the main character. You seeing
yeah.
her reaction is more vicious than seeing innards flying everywhere or whatever. There's a an anime which has a really long Japanese name that I'm currently blanking on. But there's a scene where the main character, who is half vampire or something, gets swung around the room by his intestines, and it's done in like a white background room, and all of the blood is done like paint splatter, and you know that what's happening is incredibly violent, and the main character can't die, but it's still so much more about portraying the violence of the rainy monkey something. It's been a while since I've seen it. And it's like so much more interesting in what's happening to the aggressor than how the main character is suffering, because you know that nothing can happen to him. And the way that even as insanely vicious of a scene, right, it's still telling you something interesting. When you are stuck in a visual novel medium and you get like, here's one frame and you can only communicate so much with one frame, it's really hard to visually shock someone. So you're better off doing something that's more like building suspense. There's a Japanese movie called Cairo, which is about how uh, digital vampires slowly take over the world. Is my best interpretation of it. But the entire time, you're like seeing everything slowly build up and slowly getting worse and slowly crumbling, and it builds the suspense really, really well. Which is something that you could do with a visual novel because you're limited line by line. Like people can't see ahead; they don't know what's going to happen next, and have the images match the tempo with how things are crumbling, rather than just being like, "Blah, I got ya."
Yeah, with this one, it's really heavily relies on the gore to be the shock factor for you. Maybe possibly also due to its like shorter playtime and its bigger cast that like you don't
Hmm.
have as much time to work with each girl, and like they have to include all of these different routes, so each girl is only given a limited amount of spotlight. Whereas like something like Doki Doki, which is also on the shorter side, does have a little bit more time to develop the characters. Though I will say, You and Me and Her was the blueprint for Doki Doki. It's supposedly the creator says he did not know about the game, but it's a Japanese visual novel that's very similar in themes, but came out like a decade earlier. It just didn't get
Hmm.
translated until a couple years ago. But that's a really good one if you are looking for like shocking visual novel, meta fiction elements, sort of parody satire thing. Would recommend You and Me and Her. You can use that to salve like the burn from playing How to Date a Magical Girl.
But next up, we have one of the games I have big gripes with. Now, I don't normally leave Steam reviews ever, um, especially because it's the business account. But this one particularly was in genre, and I was really excited about the release for it, which is Toki Fuji's Outside the Box. This one released on the 29th of March 2022, and I bought it on release day, and the release was really bad. The state that the game was shipped in was insanely unplayable, and it felt like it should have been early access. It's just so was not complete. But I will read out my scathing review verbatim. Game crashes all open applications on my computer if I alt tab, which is insane because it's a fucking visual novel. How do you fuck that up?
Oh my god.
Game has no tutorial and the gameplay instructions are vague at best, which is normally not an issue, but it has a UI thing where it just really wasn't clear what you were supposed to be clicking on to progress anything. So you're just kind of frustratedly slamming things on your screen. And then I spent 1 minute reading through the dialogue and then the other 19 looking for my towel. You just told me I have a towel in my bag. When I try to interact with my bag, there is no towel. Nowhere else is there a towel. I will elaborate on this in a moment, but the rest of the review is game seems rushed and belongs in early access. Very, very difficult to even just play through the dialogue or to know what you're supposed to be doing. Instantly refunded. This is still 6 to 8 months away from release. So we're now 2 years later. I haven't come back and played it, obviously, and I don't know if they have actually fixed the things or it has got any better, but it is still sitting on mixed reviews for the thing. And they did actually reply to it with like, hey, look, we fixed some of the technical issues. I'm like, okay, that's great. I can also fix the technical issues by just not fucking pressing Alt Tab while I'm playing the game. That's fine. But let me talk about the towel thing. right? So basically, you, I think you're saying you're about to go and shower or something in the dialogue, and then you're like, oh yes, I have my, I think it's a gym towel or something. You're like, I have this towel, and then it's like, I can't go and shower until I go and find the towel. You're like, okay, I'll get the towel. I look in my bag, which is my inventory, and it's like there's no towel there. I'm like, you literally just said it in the dialogue that I had one, and then I go into every room in the house, click on every interactable object, and I literally spent 20 minutes looking, and I can't find it. I'm like, this is supposed to be a horny game where I can play with my dick in one hand. I shouldn't have how to play guide open on the table that I'm flicking through. I shouldn't have to struggle with all these things just to be able to click and make the text happen, to be able to move through any of the stuff. So I was just like, this is actually insane that this should be this difficult. And if you have puzzles like this, it shouldn't be designed in such a fucking horrible way that I have to suffer to get through and make things happen. So this was really like the main game where I was like, man, I'm really excited about this. I really like Tokyo Fuji's art style. It's like insanely clean because I'm not normally like into furry content and stuff, but it's like the art style is so good that it just doesn't matter. Like it just transcends niche.
That's the best
Um,
kind of furry art.
right? So I was really excited about it. I'm like, cool. And it feels like they're adapting a comic into a game and they've just shoehorned puzzles or something into it, but like really shittily when they could have just made it like a really consistent comic adaptation, but added routing. Like that's the advantage of it being a game and not being a comic is that it has routes. So you just add routes to the comic, and there you go. You have a fucking good visual novel that has a lot of great art in it, and then it works. And they just did not do that. So yeah, I was really disappointed with this one.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that also proves that like it's important to make a good first impression, I feel like when you're releasing a game,
Yeah.
or if it is like if it has like a game-breaking bug like that or just something like absolutely insane, like even if you fix it, a lot of people are just going to be like you've already sort of disappointed me, like I'm not coming back.
Well, that's the QA thing, right? And a lot of AAA studios have this same sort of problem where it's like, as a developer, especially when you make a puzzle, right, and you play through stuff, after the very, very first time you've completed a puzzle, you're just shortcutting to get to the next thing, right? And I do this a lot as well. But it's like, I'll always be clicking exactly where the optimal thing is because I've already learned it and I mastered it and I'm moving on. But you need to get people that aren't you, the developer, to play test the game. You need to get them to come and have a look at it. They need to be able to, without your help, it's called blind play testing, come and see it and not struggle. And be able to solve everything, be able to get through everything. And in theory, the developer should have sent the game to the artist and the artist play the game and be like, yes, this is fine or great or whatever, and not have any issues before they fucking launch on Steam. That firstly seems insane. But yeah, what you're saying about first impressions is true. Like we've just had in this week, Concord launch and die, launch and be taken off the internet. In how bad it's doing, and it's showing more and more that the customer, I think discerning is not the right word because normally it's the customer has a discerning taste. It's like the customer is going to just invite you into a Denny's parking lot and fist fight you if the game is not good. And I feel that hostility a lot with some of the reviews that we get and how unjustly some people critique what we're doing. We literally got a comment today on Twitter, which was like, this game updates once a month, and that's not enough. And the content that they put out once a month is not enough. And I'm like, shit, all right, who fucking does more than that? You know? So it can be hard to meet up and appease some of the people, but the bar is not that high. Like, and sliding under it definitely is not a good first impression.
All right. So for my next one, I'm going to talk a little bit about VR Kanojo, which if you've looked into like adult gaming and VR at all, you've probably heard of this one. Now, I currently don't own VR myself, but a couple years ago, I was living with somebody who had a full VR setup. This is a partner. So we explored a lot of like, ooh, what kind of sexy things are in VR right now. And this would have been like 2020 or 2019 or so. And at the time, VR Kanojo was one of the sort of bigger games or more like professional looking VR porn games because it's by Illusion, which for those of you unfamiliar with Illusion, they made stuff like Koikatsu or Honey Select. So a lot of those, build an anime girl and fuck her kind of games. You're probably also familiar with the art style if you've played like any free porny visual novel on Itch.io. There's like a 50-50 shot. It was made in like Koikatsu or Honey Select or something like that. But this one is a bit different in that it's not a build a bitch. You do have a bitch and you can customize her in certain ways. You can change like her outfits and accessories, but you can't change like her hair color or you can't just like completely make a different character or something like that. Instead, it's basically a sort of 15 to 20-minute little romance where you're in a high school girl's room and she's being all ooh woo and cute, and then you fuck her. Now, one thing I will warn you about that I found out by reading one of the reviews, because the main character is a high school girl, Steam is very strict about anything related to high school and adult content. Most games or visual novels that have high school characters, or even characters who could be implied to be high school age, like if they're wearing a high school uniform or at a high school looking campus, those games will typically get flagged. And if they have sexual content, it either needs to be removed or done through an off-site patch. You can't patch it on Steam because it's still, by Steam's rules, illegal content. So because of that, VR Kanojo, if you want the sexy stuff, needs an off-site patch from Illusion. However, Illusion shut down maybe like a half a year ago or so. That there was a big announcement. They still technically exist. Basically, all of the developers just made a different company. I forget what the whole deal was with that. But that patch is no longer officially available anywhere. Of course, there's plenty of third-party sites where you can download it. But that just made me think about sort of the ramifications of offsite patches where, for some games, there's going to be a point where that offsite link just doesn't exist anymore, and people might be denied or have difficulties sort of even accessing the lewd content. And again, this is a VR game and it's sitting at a hefty $50.
Oof.
Um, and, VR games, especially at that time, were kind of known for being expensive and short because they require such specific tech and stuff to be created. So they naturally have sort of a bigger price tag. But, $50 for 20 minutes of story and then a couple of sex positions is insane. Um, especially there was one part of the game that was actively like really bad. So there's a couple of sex positions you can do in her bedroom, and then the only other place you can go is the bathroom. Like you can take a bath with her and then unlock a couple of extra scenes. Now, to do those scenes, you have to do sort of a like bath mini game where you have to help her bathe by touching her body in the right order, basically, like start with the
Classic
less
meat and
sexy
fuck.
zones. Yeah, except for from what I remember when I played it, her like sensitivity is crazy, and like it never detects where you're actually supposed to be touching, and it's very unclear like where you're supposed to go first. And every time you touch her in a place she doesn't like, she does the exact same animation and says like, "Yamete," something like that. Like same voice line again and again and again. So what happens is you want to get to the sexy stuff, but you're trying to bathe her, and she keeps saying the same fucking voice line over and over and over
Oh
again.
my god. It's
And
just like being a parent, toddler bathing
yeah,
simulator.
she does not want to take a bath, or at least not in the way that you want to. So for those reasons, it's like the price combined with the mediocrity of the game itself. And especially now that the patch may be inaccessible or hard to access for some people, would not recommend this one if you are a VR porn connoisseur. There are plenty of better games you can get that have significantly more content or just better content or more amounts of content when it comes to the current VR adult market.
You did make a good point about lost media, which is something more and more that we have to deal with these days. I don't know if you saw, but N Hente got taken down today
Yeah.
because a lot of piracy sites and stuff are being attacked. And so, if you're, let's say, you, viewer, you're a game dev, you've created this really cool thing, but it requires files from multiple places. Obviously, that gives it an opportunity to be, lost if something comes down. A lot of our content THM, everything's backed up on Mega. I have personal backups in different places. It's on 4 or 5 different stores if you include Patreon. And so, in theory, if one site goes down, then the game still exists as like a live and updating thing in other places. But if you're limited to one storefront like Steam, especially if your content is potentially at risk at going against the terms of service, then you just risk that the entire thing can vanish. And especially more and more when we have radical censorship laws and stuff being drafted up every day, then we just actually do have a pretty good chance for a lot of these things disappearing and vanishing. And when it's games that we think are a bit shit, obviously it's not as upsetting, but it does mean that when there is actually good projects, do stuff that you do care about, then it is worth watching out for. It is worth trying to support it and help keep it together. And what is it they always say? Writing a letter to your local congressman to try and keep porn alive or whatever. But this is the kind of stuff that we're always thinking about on the Sexy Business podcast. There's a lot of games out there that are shit. A lot of people think that the games that I make are shit. And that's fine. Look, everything is kind of a work in progress. Some things aren't ever going to be perfect, and some things are going to suck. But like, I don't know, like my complaints about Outside the Box might have been fixed by now. It's been 2 years. And you never know unless if you come back and give it a second chance. Maybe we should, in the future, do an episode where we play some of these games. So if you are potentially interested in that, sound off in the comments, because I'm not going to subject myself to it unless if I have to. But that has been, another week gone, another episode of the Sexy Business podcast, where we are trying to talk about stuff that is happening in the adult gaming industry, because there's not a lot of discourse about some of the crazy shit that we have to suffer when it comes to putting it all together and making content for you to crank your meat to, which, look, honestly, not that many people are taking up this noble cause, and we deserve a lot more respect than we get. But that said, if you've been sticking around with us for this long, I feel like we've earned you clicking the subscribe button and clicking that like button, because it makes our local cat girl very happy. And honestly, that makes it a slightly more enjoyable business environment for me to work in. So if you could help me out, that would be fantastic. And then hopefully next week we'll see you on another cool and interesting episode of the Sexy Business Podcast.
Bye bye.